So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining this really important conversation. My name is Erin. I am with RTZ Hope as our storytelling coordinator and grant writer, and I am so incredibly privileged to have you all here. Um, this is such a vital conversation that affects so many of us, either personally or through those we know. And I am just can't wait for you all to have this conversation. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce you to RTZ Hope if you're unfamiliar with us. The mission of RTZ Hope is to offer hope and healing to those impacted by pregnancy and infant loss through genuine connection, holistic support, inclusive resources, and grief informed education. We offer direct services and resources to bereaved parents while also providing support and educational material to providers. We invite you to visit our website to access a host of resources, support group offerings, and educational materials. As part of our commitment to engaging a global community of bereaved parents and providers, this event is provided free in part by generous donations from our supporters. We would like to especially thank today's community conversation, which is happening in honor of Walker Kimberly, and our support from our sponsors. I'd like to introduce you to Stephanie Schick. Stephanie is a curriculum developer and former elementary school teacher who lives in Michigan with her husband and their 3 children. After experiencing 6 miscarriages over 10 years, her journey was profoundly shaped by the stillbirth of her daughter, Madeline Rose. Nakia is also on our panel. Nakia Peters-Camille is a Brooklyn-based social worker and grief educator who helps others find their breath again through clinical support and somatic healing. Her work is deeply rooted in her own journey through pregnancy loss, fertility challenges, and the death of her beloved mother, Hope. She's a published author and certified grief yoga facilitator. Courtney Collins is a mom based in Austin, Texas, where she lives with her husband, Joe, and their son, Bennett. After experiencing the loss of her daughter, Eleanor, she became passionate about supporting other families navigating pregnancy after loss. Our facilitator today is Lindsay. She's an amazing person who is a clinical social worker and psychotherapist. She specializes in perinatal loss and pregnancy that follows. She founded Pregnancy After Loss Support, a nonprofit, which is now a part of RTZ Hope, and we are so excited to have her leadership on our board. She will be helping to facilitate the conversation today. A few housekeeping before we get started. To allow for intimate and uninterrupted conversation, we'll be holding questions until the very end. We encourage you to introduce yourself in the comments. Feel free to share where you're attending from and what drew you to this event. If you have questions along the way, please add those to the chat and we will try to make time at the end to ask them. If we don't get to any questions, we will send those out to our panelists via email, and then we'll send the answers out to anybody who registered for the event. We also understand that conversation may generate the need for support for some listeners. If you need support at any time during the conversation, please reach out to Betsy Winter via email at betsy@rtzhope.org. I will put that and a lot more information into the chat as we go. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to our panel and to Lindsay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we will get started. Lindsay, it is all yours. You're on mute still, though.
Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to host this panel today. I'm excited to dive into the topics. So I was hoping we could start with a brief introduction about who we all are, as Erin covered a little bit, but more about why we want to be on this panel today. So who would like to start?
I can start. Hi, everyone. As Aaron stated, my name is Nakia. I'm a Brooklyn-based mom. I wanted to be on the panel because I'm a former RTZ community member and I attended so many of these conversations and support groups after the loss of my second baby, who we called baby Camille, due to a miscarriage. And I just really wanted to be able to share my story because when it happened to me, I was just so surprised. I had no idea what this was, and I really didn't have any support in my community if it wasn't for RTZ Hope. So I just wanted to give back and share.
Thank
I
you,
can
Nakia.
go next.
Sure. Thank you, Nakia. Yeah, Stephanie, if you want to go, and then Courtney.
So my name is Stephanie, and I have been married for almost 11 years now. And in that span, we've had 6 miscarriages and 3 living children. My first pregnancy ever was a miscarriage. So after that, I just have had a very difficult time with every single pregnancy and loss that we've had. Um, the most profound loss was back in October 2024. I also had a missed miscarriage. I was 18 weeks along and I had to deliver our daughter, and that really shaped the person I am today. And I was really looking for community, and I was looking for other women who had been through similar experiences. And I found RTZ, and I was able to connect with those women, hear their story, share my story. And I just loved the community of it all. And I want to give back as those women poured into me when I was going through my losses.
Thank you, Stephanie. Courtney?
Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Collins. Similar to these ladies on the screen, RTZ, I would say saved my life after losing my daughter, Eleanor. Gave me community and beautiful people I've met through this horrible journey. And so that was my reason for giving back. Our daughter was born at 39 weeks in one day and had a birth complication, and we spent 11 hours and 1 minute in the NICU with Ellie before she passed. And I believe she gives me all my strength and guidance today. And so she helped me bring her little brother Bennett here, and he was born just a few days after Stephanie's girl in December. So I'm really grateful to be on this panel. Like my other panelists said, RTZ has really poured into me. So I hope to give everyone a little heart hug and maybe some help back.
Thanks, Courtney. And a little bit about me. My first daughter, Nora, was stillborn as my first pregnancy almost 14 years ago in December. So it's been a while for me, but online community and finding people through online back then was really what also saved me in my deepest grief. And then also how PALS was developed, pregnancy after loss support, because I needed people during subsequent pregnancy more than ever because the anxiety was so hard with my daughter, Zoe, who is now 12. So, and this is what I do professionally. I now help people as PALS has been absorbed by Return to Zero. I help people mm, um, walk through pregnancy loss and then through the subsequent pregnancy because it can be so difficult. And today, let's jump in to a little bit more detail about everyone's stories, everyone's babies who are no longer with us, and then their subsequent pregnancy journey specifically. And as we talk about subsequent pregnancies, a lot of people who I remember when I just had my loss, I was just so I wanted to find other stories of hope. So I wanted to know that other people had been through a loss and then had gone on to have a living kiddo. So it wasn't very far along after Nora died, just a couple days where I started thinking about becoming pregnant again. So this is an issue that is maybe not, might not be top of mind or might not be there right away as an option, as we all know, with the physical needs of rest and the emotional needs of grieving when you after a loss, but it is top of mind, not to replace the baby that died, but to become parents in the way we envision to a living kiddo, right? So we think about subsequent pregnancies pretty soon after the death of our babies. So what a lot of people want to know is that you brought another living kiddo into the world, which we've already identified. And then the next question usually is, what was the hardest part? So who wants to start? What do you remember being difficult, the difficult milestones, the things that were challenging for you? And then we'll also get into how we get through it if people want to know what to prepare for ahead.
I can go first. So, my most profound loss was October 2024. I went in for just a regular checkup. I was 18 weeks and I had found out at that appointment that our daughter no longer had a heartbeat. Whew. I was completely taken off guard. I thought everything was fine. I had prior losses before that, but they were very early on. This was the furthest I had been where I've had a loss. And I was just completely heartbroken, shattered, and I had to come home and put on a brave face for my two boys because I didn't want them to see, exactly what had happened. They were at the time 8 and 4, so they didn't quite understand. They did know that our daughter had passed, but they didn't know to the extent of what that meant for me having to go into labor and delivery and give birth. So after that had happened, I immediately started reaching out to people like, has anyone else had an 18-week missed miscarriage? I had no idea that she had passed 4 weeks prior. I had no symptoms, nothing. And I started reaching out to other women at the same point. And I, again, wanted those stories of hope. Like, what did you do differently when you got pregnant again? Or what did you not do? Or, and all these women were giving me advice and everything. And I ended up getting pregnant the next month, and that was another loss. And I thought, there's no way. Like, how could this happen again? Like, I don't understand. But I was like, nope, I'm going to keep going. It's okay. It's just not our time. I got pregnant again, and I lost that baby as well. So now we are 3 miscarriages in a row. And I sat down with the OB and I said, like, what do I need to do? Like, I don't understand what's happening. And he told me that I needed a DNC and that the subsequent pregnancies were like almost like too much. And we needed to kind of give my body like a reset. So we did the procedure. It was extremely traumatic. The procedure itself went well, but the emotional toll that it took after being pregnant for the third time in a row. And then I kind of just said, you know what, if it happens, it happens. I got to kind of just take a step back, relax a little, and let my body heal. And that same month, I got pregnant with my daughter that is now alive. So basically, don't give up. I was determined to have another child. We've always wanted a big family. We've always wanted a lot of kids. Unfortunately, we had to experience some losses in between our living children, but it just makes them, more beautiful. And, I just pour so much more into them because I know what it's like to experience the loss. And it just shows the perseverance. Like I did not want to give up. And if you really truly feel in your heart, like don't give up. You might have to wait a little bit. You might have to get some blood work done, whatever your doctor suggests. But I didn't give up. And now we have our beautiful daughter um, after all of that. But it was very hard. I was in the doctor every single week, ultrasounds all the time, NSTs every few days. I was very cautious, very reserved, but I just had that conversation with my provider and they knew my history and they were very caring and they were able to help me navigate and get through it. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. And what I'm hearing is don't give up. And it's really hard to hold on to that hope because it is scary with all the
Yep.
appointments, the pregnancy tests, and you experiencing reoccurring pregnancy loss is another real struggle because there's so much uncertainty. Like, will this ever happen? Will we seem to get there and then the hope is there and then it falls again? And that can be one of the challenging parts of a subsequent pregnancy. And then the anxiety and fear that comes with it. So thank you for sharing your story. Courtney or Nakia, who would want to answer the hardest part of that question and share a little bit more about your journey?
Yeah, I think it's the first 9 months of pregnancy. No.
Well done.
Yeah, definitely. I think I really like, Lindsay, that you touched on normalizing that many families after they experience loss want to get pregnant again because I mean, in the hospital after we lost Eleanor, we had this feeling of like we still want a big family. We want her to have brothers and sisters, and that was something we talked about, but kind of felt crazy for that maybe there's a lot of things that you grieve when losing a kid that if you've never lost a kid, you probably would never understand. But then you go to circles like this, and okay, we all have pretty similar thoughts. So thank you for normalizing that because that was really challenging. I had an emergency C-section with Ellie, and so my doctor advised me to wait 6 months before trying to grow our family. And I felt like I wanted to get as pregnant as fast as possible, or otherwise I was going to be too scared to do it again. I needed to do it within the haze of the grief, or I'd probably just like wash my hands and not do it again because it was so terrifying. I actually found out I was pregnant the Sunday before I went on the RTZ retreat, which is a really beautiful space. If you haven't been, I highly recommend that. Um, and I think it's difficult. Pregnancy after loss is a lot different. I think there was my timelines of when I was pregnant with Eleanor and when I was pregnant with my son Bennett were very similar. So in a way it was comforting. I got to kind of relive. I had a very healthy pregnancy with Ellie. So relive some of those memories with her.
Courtney,
But in
so
the
that's the research shows that's actually one of the traumatic experiences is if you line up with the same timeline, that can make the subsequent pregnancy anxiety even more difficult because of the similar sensory experience outside of our body that reminds us of the previous pregnancy. So it's interesting to me that you identified as difficult, but also comforting. Is that the word you used?
Yeah, it was comforting in that I kind of knew that part of it for me, like, and could relive a lot of those happy times that I had with Ellie and remember those joys, and then coincide with the fear. I would say for me, because Ellie was a birth complication, her passing, it got scarier for me as I went along and was terrified of the end, even though we had a planned C-section. A lot of those were arranged. I ended up in antepartum before Bennett was born because I couldn't control my blood pressure. I was so nervous. But thankfully, I have an amazing OB who really worked with me, and she's like, whatever we have to do to make you feel as comfortable as possible to get Bennett here, we did. So I think for the last 2 months, I did a daily NST. I think what I learned is like whatever is gonna get your kiddo here and do it with the best mental health possible. There's not a lot of room for it. Is really important. So you might feel silly. Like every time I went into triage, I was like, oh, I feel silly for going. Like, what if there's nothing really wrong? And every time the labor and delivery nurses were like, no, we'd rather you come get checked out and it all be okay than the opposite. And then when Bennett was born, we knew everyone on the hospital floor. So that was really special. But definitely just that end part was really, really difficult for me. And I'll say we experienced a lot of our first milestones while I was pregnant with Bennett, and definitely Ellie's first birthday, being pretty pregnant with Bennett. The kind of physical flashbacks I wouldn't have really expected. I wish I would have kind of foreseen that that was going to happen.
Thank you, Courtney. So you brought up a couple things that the research also shows about the subsequent pregnancy, which is that as you get closer to, there's two kind of there's multiple milestones, but the two that are that stand out, where the anxiety peaks in a subsequent pregnancy is when you're in your subsequent pregnancy and you get closer to the gestational loss date that you were when you lost previous babies. So I'm similar in nature, like my anxiety kept getting more and more intense as I got closer to because Nora was born at 40 weeks and 4 days. So as close as I got closer to birth, my anxiety increased, right? I have some clients who maybe have a similar timeline to Stephanie where their gestational loss was like mid-trimester, and also, miscarriage time frame, and their anxiety will peak around then too. So we call that the gestational loss, kind of trauma window. And then if you also, which wasn't, it was similar, but different for you, Courtney. Trying to find an example. So for me, Zoe was pregnant. I was pregnant with her at around 20 weeks when Nora's birthday came, the first year birthday. And so if you also go through that loss state when you're pregnant, that can also be a traumatic time period. So. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it was really important to you, I'm hearing in your story, to get reassurance for your anxiety, which is actually what we recommend during the subsequent pregnancy is healthcare providers do everything in their power to help reassure the patient. And you gave great examples about how you had a great healthcare team that did that. So thank you. Anything else to add, Courtney, or can we hear from Nakia?
Go ahead, Nikia.
Yeah, so similar to Courtney and Stephanie, I felt a lot of anxiety. Um, I experienced my miscarriage at 9 weeks. My first son was born, he was a honeymoon baby. We weren't trying. And so we thought that when we were ready for another baby, it was going to be like easy peasy. And that was not what happened. I ended up having a lot of fertility issues and having to go through IUI. And so I conceived our second baby through IUI. And I just went in for a normal scan. And similar to Stephanie's story, I was just talking to the doctor and then she just stopped. And I'm just like, well, what's going on? Let me keep trying to talk to her. Like, how's your day? Just trying to like, because it just seemed very odd that she just stopped talking. And she was like, there's no heartbeat. And I was just like, what? Like, I just didn't think that that would be what I heard that day. Um, and there was just so much shock, especially because like the year before I lost my mom. So it was like an additional grief. And my second baby was just like this light and this darkness of like grief that I was experiencing. And so when I experienced the loss and had to go through the ENC, similar to Stephanie, in a labor and delivery room, which felt like a slap in the face and have it be called an abortion, when it wasn't, just all slaps. Just felt really, really, really heartbreaking. Um, Afterwards, I just took some time to just kind of like be with my grief for my baby. Before trying to see our options, we did attempt additional IUI, but it wasn't really successful. So then we went the IVF route, and we conceived through the second IVF attempt. But I was never really like ready because I always was just anxious. Like, is the baby really gonna make it? I don't know. I was always holding my breath at the scans. And it wasn't until she came, because even her birth was like an emergency C-section. She had increased fetal movement. She couldn't have the birth canal, which is why we had to have the emergency C-section. It was just so much. It wasn't until she actually was delivered that I was like, okay, I have this baby in my hand. I can actually breathe and actually celebrate. I didn't want a baby shower. I didn't want anything because I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen, because that's what grief taught me, is what teaches you. Like, you can plan as much as you want, but you don't know what's going to happen. So you just take it one day at a time. And that's what really helped me with the anxiety, like just recognizing it, like it's here, it's normal, it's here, and I'm just gonna take it one day at a time. Like, we made it past the scan. All right, let's wait till the next one. And that's what really supported me.
Thank you for that, Nakia. Yes, I think you said a lot of important things that are themes in the subsequent pregnancy. Working backwards, a lot of people say they don't feel better until there's a breathing baby in their arms, right? Like the anxiety, the ache, it never really goes away until that piece. And it even statistically carries over into postpartum and postpartum anxiety or depression. You're more at risk for that due to having a risk factor is having previous losses or going through, sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat, fertility treatments. So that's the other piece that's really, I mean, there's so many compounding factors to your story. One that is very relatable to our community is that some people do have to use a fertility treatment, and that is another added layer of grief, another complication, just more stress and anxiety added to an already traumatic situation. So thank you for sharing that part. And then I'm so sorry for the loss of your mom. I imagine that made things even more challenging. So you had just so many like grief on top of grief and trauma on top of trauma that it makes sense that you wouldn't be able to breathe until, I'm sorry, what was your baby's name again?
So we didn't know the gender, so we just called them Baby Camille, just our last
Okay.
name. So yeah.
Yeah. And then what the mantra you said is actually one that we talk about a lot, which is like just take it one day at a time. Even for me, that was too much. So it was like one moment at a time is all I could really get through. So you guys hit on a lot of the themes for what is the hardest part. What I think people also want to know as we move, I'm trying not to cough, I apologize. As we move into the next question, is what did you find what was most helpful in trying to hold those two opposing truths, right? How do we hold hope and fear, grief and joy? How do we lean into some of the goodness of expecting again while also being terrified out of our minds and grieving a baby we will forever miss or multiple babies? Who wants to start? I know it's a lot, so you can take a minute.
I can
I
start
think
again. So I think it's really hard. It is very hard. At first, I didn't want to pretend. I was pretending I wasn't pregnant and thought like maybe if I just don't pretend it's happening, nothing bad will happen this time. But that wasn't working.
Before you go on, that's called emotional cushioning. And so that's the psychological term for when you are protecting yourself emotionally from hope or joy or a bonding with the baby, the subsequent baby, because you're protecting against the fear of loss of babies that previously have passed away. There you
Yep.
continue.
Yep, I was definitely doing that. And it wasn't until maybe I was 14 weeks, which was when Madeline had died, that I was like, okay, maybe I can start celebrating this baby. And I tried to think it doesn't matter, what's happening. This baby deserves to be celebrated. I don't want to go 9 months and be miserable and then have everything be okay and look back and think, wow, I just wasted 9 months being upset and sad. And so I tried really to hone in on that and just think, this baby deserves to be celebrated. And however long they're here, that was how long they were supposed to be here for. So after that 14-week period, we tried to, like Courtney was saying, little milestones here and there. Like, okay, we have this to look forward to. We've got the next scan to look forward to. The anatomy scan is coming up. But then also, we held space for our daughter who had passed, Madeline. And we would go monthly out to the cemetery and put flowers on her grave. We celebrated her birthday with our two older boys and bought cupcakes. So we still kept her a part of our family and held that space for grief. But then we also celebrated our other daughter, Madison, who is here now, and talked about them as sisters. And like the boys say they have two sisters, one in heaven, one on earth. And it was very difficult to hold space for both, but it was also very important to hold space for both and to continue to do that now. And we'll say, we're going to go visit Madeline's grave and we'll get the boys together again and put flowers down and still holding her in our hearts. As difficult as it was very important. And I'm really glad that I didn't just disassociate for the whole pregnancy and I enjoyed it as much as I could.
Yeah, and that's really hard to do. I know that I put a lot of like emotional cushioning into place. And when some clients and other pregnancy after loss moms can get to the point where they're like, I want to lean into joy because I want to celebrate this baby for as long as they're here, like you said, which is really great too. Um, you said some other great things. Oh, the holding like on to the rituals for the babies that have passed away while also holding space for joy is one way that we can distinguish between the two relationships and keep the babies that passed away in our families as siblings, but not replacements, right? So teaching our other children before the older children, living children, or children that come after, that their family includes the babies that died is a way of also holding on to that hope and joy at the same time. Grief and fear. What is it? Hope and fear, grief and loss. So thank you for that. And the other thing you kind of that I'm taking away from what you said is that like it's important to feel all your feelings. So in order to feel the joyful moments, we saw in the hopeful ones, we also have to feel the hard ones. Um, some people, when I was going through my loss and the subsequent pregnancy, talked about the quote that like the only way out is through. And so that's how I kind of resonated with that. Nakia, you chimed in before. Do you want to answer the question next? How did you hold the two opposing truths?
yes, very similar to what Stephanie stated. It was just a lot of like being in grief and being there and allowing myself to feel it. which then allowed for the joy to come. Like once I didn't need to push it away because emotions come and they go. The joy was able to come over time, as well as like just being in community with people and having them celebrate me as much as I didn't want to celebrate myself. Like I remember not wanting to have a baby shower, and then my coworkers threw me a beautiful surprise baby shower, and it was like, how can I like not celebrate and experience the joy that my community has given to me? Additionally, we had rituals that we still follow, like just celebrating our birthday. I have this little like doll that's just like a symbol, just because 9 weeks was so small on the sonogram. And this little representation is just something that we bring out at different holidays next to the candle that we light when we do days, just to like symbolize it for our kids. And my son, similar to your children, Stephanie, he says like I have a baby sibling in heaven and a baby sibling here. So just keeping those rituals and just allowing the grief to come, and then when the joy comes, I allow that to come once the grief has passed, not pushing it away. It's very important.
Beautiful. And thank you for bringing and showing your little, I think in like Japanese culture, they call them the Jesus statues. Have we talked about that
Yeah.
art? I mean, that was kind of popular, how like they have a tradition for honoring lost children, so babies and children that have died, and you might see these in Japanese gardens. So I love that. Thank you for thinking about bringing it today.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Courtney, how did you hold the two opposing truths, grief and joy, hope and fear, during your subsequent pregnancy?
Yeah, I think that's the theme of life now after losing Eleanor, and it's something I'm working really hard on. And I think it's something that before losing Ellie, I never had to do. Things could just be 100% happy, or I never had as, I don't know if shallow is the right word, but not these depth of emotions before, of like both extreme joy and extreme sadness somehow held at once, and then in a world where people don't really understand extreme sadness or extreme joy. They want you to be okay, you're having another kid now, you're happy, you're fixed, you're over this. And so I think that was really complicated for me, as I'm sure it is for every family going through loss. My number one thing that was helpful was a mental health specialist that understood perinatal loss. I think that was really important for both me and my husband. My husband had a really traumatic stay with my daughter in the NICU while I recovered. So we both had really important things that we're still working through. The RTZ community, I did 3 pregnancy after loss support groups. After the third one ended, I was like, well, it's time for Bennett to come, but I'm really gonna miss these groups of women where you were just really held well with women who understood what you were going through, as opposed to maybe a pregnancy of someone who hadn't experienced any kind of loss before. And I think being comfortable with the experiences are going to be very different. With my daughter, we had a huge gender reveal, we had a huge baby shower, everyone knew everything. And with my son, we kept it a little bit more small. After Ellie passed, our world became really small and really intimate because a lot of people we have a lot of great people in our life, but a lot of people didn't understand or couldn't hold us in the way we wanted to be. And so we really leaned into our loss support groups. And my husband's a part of Sad Dad, so any of the dads out there, that's a good resource to check out as well. But really leaned into those groups, like I mentioned. Really leaned into. I changed my MFM with this pregnancy, and I got advice from another lost mom that I really like. She asked her OB. She said, "I'm gonna be a really high maintenance patient with this pregnancy. Can you support that?" And I think that's a great question to ask your provider. You can put whatever words you want to it, but it's okay that you need more than the average person because you've experienced the worst thing. So if you need more to help you get through to the end, then that's what you need. And the other thing I would say, I think the other women included this, is including Ellie. Like, if Ellie were here and we were having Bennett, she would be in the photo to share that our news of being pregnant with Bennett. And so she was included. Her Ellie bear was in our photo to announce Bennett. And so we just did things a little bit differently and quietly. But Stephanie, to your point, I still wanted to make sure that Bennett was celebrated as much as Eleanor was when we were pregnant with her. And one quote that was really helpful for me and kind of helped anchored because I like control and pregnancy after loss is you get no control. Um, but I had a friend in a group who said, if I had a time machine and could go back, I would only change what happened to the situation. I would never change the fact that my kiddo wasn't here. His son is Kieran. He would said I'd never change the fact that Kieran was here. So if I have to go through this to love him, then I'm I'm gonna do anything. So I thought about that with Ellie. Like I got the chance to love her and to know her. I, with all my might, wish I could change what happened to her. But if for whatever reason something happened with another pregnancy, I just anchored myself on my only thing I can control is that I get to love this baby for as long as they're gonna be here. And so trying to anchor it on love, which my therapist might tell you that I struggled with that some days, but trying to anchor everything in love was really helpful for me.
That's so beautiful. Anchor everything in love. And I also felt that too. Like if I had to go back and change anything, if I had to go back and I couldn't change anything, would I still do it the same way? And the answer is yeah. So the way you put it is gonna make me teary now. A couple other things I noticed in your story, you kind of led us, or your answer, you led us to some of the next questions. But in the beginning, you talked about one of the hard parts that of pal, which is like that loss of innocence and the loss of like kind of being naive to the hard parts of life, right? And that becomes very apparent when you lose a baby, and then when you go through subsequent pregnancy, learning how to hold those dualities again is so challenging because you know how deep grief is, but you also, your grief is deep because of your love, which you kind of ended on, Courtney. So thank you for that. Other things you kind of brought up lead into the other questions when you started talking about family dynamics and how a subsequent pregnancy and a loss impact your relationships with not only your partner, your spouse, but your living children or your extended family, and then also how to interact with health care. What am I trying to say? Healthcare providers. So thank you for being patient with me there. And so we can jump into some of those. I really liked that you identified though that things that were helpful to kind of go in and process your grief and even maybe find hope was also finding a mental health care provider who's trained as a perinatal specialist, which I think is really important. I'm also trained in that. And then that support group for both you and your partner is so um, wonderful because a lot of our friends before the losses, if they haven't had one themselves, it's really hard for them to understand. And then that can strain those relationships, right? So if we can find people who've been through it, we feel like, okay, we're not alone in this. Not that we want the worst to happen to anybody else, but we don't want to be alone in the worst thing that ever happened to us. So those are all great points. So maybe you can pick up where you left off, Courtney, because you dabbled in it. The next question is, um, what did it look like to walk through a pregnancy after loss with your partner, with your extended family, with your friends, with living children? Like you could pick a part of that you want to explore, and maybe others can explore other parts. But what were some of the challenges? What were some of the good things about it?
Yeah, I think that could be a whole webinar probably in itself. Because it's complex. So Ellie was our honeymoon baby. We got pregnant with her right away, which we're super lucky. And then Ellie was born and passed on November 1st, and our first year wedding anniversary was November 4th. So we went through a lot our first year of marriage. Um, and so I think for my husband and I think a lot of families who've experienced loss feel this way of like, it's fused us together in a lot of ways of like there is nobody else in the world who understands what I'm going through in losing Eleanor except for him. And so it created a deeper level of connection and bond, but we've also grieved Ellie in different ways. And that took me quite a while to learn. And was hard for us because I was like, well, why aren't you this and why aren't you that? And just the way he grieved was very different to how I grieved, and now I feel like we've learned a lot about each other in that way. But then pregnancy after loss, like we are both trying to now learn how to navigate our grief together and subsequent pregnancy. And I feel like there were days where one of us was, feeling okay and good, and the other one was in a lower spot. And so figuring out how to balance those two. And then plus you add all the hormones of pregnancy, and then there's probably a whole nother webinar for after after baby is born, in terms of hormones and navigating that. But felt really lock and key. Again, both me and my husband have a mental health professional that specializes in perinatal loss. So I think that's incredibly important. And then family, it was widespread. Some family was really understanding and included Eleanor, and some really struggled to include her today, and figuring out how to navigate those relationships. And a lot of our close friends or people who are at our wedding that we thought were super close aren't really, like you said, Lindsay. Some people are great people and we're great friends, but just don't understand how to support in this time. And so we've really leaned into our lost community and have built a lot of beautiful friendships, through people who have also experienced loss and then subsequently had other children and were pregnant around similar times. Like Stephanie and I were in a group together. And so really leaned on those places of people who get it and understand, and those relationships that maybe don't, kind of let some space and time, and maybe those will come back one day.
It's a great answer, Courtney. You made me think of two things. One is that one's a psychoeducation, which is that when we're trying to preserve relationships that maybe they're good, lifelong friends, fun friends, but that we feel like they don't really get it, but we still want to maintain that relationship. What we talk about is like identifying if you're a lost parent, a support group so you can have bereaved parent friends, right? Where you ask for that emotional support from. But then kind of like compartmentalizing what you do with those friends. Like if your friends are respectful, if your friends like ask about your baby once in a while, but they just don't hold space well, or they feel like they fumble over themselves, but you're comfortable still spending time with them, like use them as your fun friend. Like you do puzzles together, or you go to a brief like dinner, or you do something low stakes, but then we don't rely on them for emotional support. So that's a technique that we've talked about if you want to maintain those relationships, or they're respectful enough to honor your loss, but they just feel uncomfortable in how to support you more deeply in it. The other thing that you kind of brought up is friends that do things well. And I have clients this week that just experienced as a couple the baby shower their friends put on for their subsequent baby. And they did not ask for this, but I thought this was so great. Their friends had a little note table with a jar where they could put in notes to their baby that died at the baby shower. And I've never heard of this in all the years that I've done it. And then so their friends thought of it. It made me teary-eyed. And they like said, you can write a note to, so and so's baby as we celebrate their next baby. So that is a tangible way that friends can show up who might not actually get it because none of these friends have ever lo had loss for them, but they were trying to be a good friend. So thanks, Courtney. Anybody else? Well, I want to hear from other people. But Nikki, let's just go the other way around. How did PAL impact your relationships in life? And you can choose which ones you want to share about.
Yeah, I definitely protected myself because I remember just telling people about the miscarriage. And one of the first things I heard was like, what did you do? Like, is it because you do too much? Like, you're always running around, you're always busy. And it was
I'm
from
so
somebody
sorry.
that
That's awful.
yeah, it was from somebody that was really, really important to me. And I just realized like some people just don't get it personally. So that skill you mentioned, Lindsay, about like finding people that do get it is something that I leaned into really heavily. And RTZ really like saved me because that's where I found people that I'm like meeting with this weekend, like just to like check in with and to really like be with that understood the loss. And so I really just had that separate, like my friends that I was just with that just got me as Nakia before the loss. And then there's the people that also had the experience that I was able to connect with, and that I'm still like in communication with and now supporting them as they continue their journey. So RTZ really, really, really saved my life with that. And just having those two separate groups was really helpful because my family and personal friends just didn't understand.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's an experience a lot of us have with friends, that can be really heartbreaking. So, Stephanie, what was your experience like with extended family, your living children? I think people are curious about that, your partner as you walk through PAL, or even your work environment, if anybody wants to chime in on that too.
Yeah, so we have two older boys. They're now 9 and 5. And because of their age, we did not tell them that I was pregnant until I was a lot further along, just to spare them, um, the emotional toll. So I think maybe halfway through or a little bit after, when I started actually showing, we shared with them that I was pregnant. And the older boy did have some questions, how do we know this baby's going to be safe? And we tried to navigate that as best we could just by saying, we're going to celebrate this baby every day. So it doesn't matter, how long it's, I am pregnant. This baby is here. We're celebrating her. And we kind of like navigated it like that. When I did get further along, and she was kicking and everything, the boys were really into it. And the further along I got, the more anxious everybody was getting, including like parents and friends. And what really helped was having specific people to go to when I was feeling anxious and just saying, hey, do you have a couple minutes? I just want to talk. Or I'm feeling a certain type of way tonight. Do you have a couple minutes to text me? So I had a few very close friends, some who did have losses and some who have not had losses. And I would just talk with them, share my feelings, have someone just listen to me was very helpful. And then kind of feeling like, whew, like the weight was gone. And really leaning into the relationship with my husband. Instead of, going further apart, we got very close because, as Courtney had said, we're the only other one who's experienced this particular loss and this pregnancy. So we know how each other was feeling as best as we could. And we would just try to be there for each other and really leaning into parents and close friends and our faith as much as we could.
That's great to bring up faith as a resource too. Some people really find that supportive and helpful and don't always think of that as a support that they can lean on. So thank you for mentioning that. I do think our relationships with our partners can be supportive. For some people, it can be complicated. It all just depends on your previously established relationship and your communication patterns and how you navigate grief and discomfort. And so I hear a lot that couples have come together here in their grief, which is wonderful. I have also heard stories where it kind of bridges or creates like a divide. And there's also middle grounds too. What I do like to talk about when it comes to the partners and pal is that, there when you're originally grieving, grief is like this. Like after your loss, there's usually like this. You're the only person who understands what I've been through because you lost the same, child that I did. Even though your individual experiences of pregnancy and becoming a parent, not being the birth partner, are different. So there's a really there's a tightness that happens. But then a lot of times in our grief, we walk different paths. And maybe Nakia or somebody else mentioned this. And then we can come back together and walk differently and come back together. So that's kind of how I see couples grieve at times. And then when the subsequent pregnancy happens, some themes I've noticed that have come up for the partner, because we don't have any, non-birthing partners or dads here today, or depending um, on how you identify yourself, is that there is this like I don't get to know how the baby's doing because they're not carrying the baby, that they then have anxiety about that they either push down because they try to support the birthing person, and so then they're dealing with that dysregulation, or that they like want to know more or be more involved, which is another is great, but it's also like they're anxious about updates. So they carry their own experience of a subsequent pregnancy with the lack of control. We feel lack of control as the birthing person, but they also feel a lack of control in supporting and knowing how the baby is doing. So, before we move into the last question about healthcare providers, any specific um, comments on that about dealing how your partner might have experienced your pal, and what it was like for them? As we've talked a lot about like extended family a little bit more.
Lindsay, to your note, I really had to work on my communication with my husband because I would be really anxious. And it is a lot as the mom to, okay, should we go to triage? Do we need another appointment? Keeping the mental load of all of that. But then also communicating with my husband, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm not, especially when we're separated all day at different jobs, like keeping him attuned to what is going on with me and Bennett. So definitely, Lindsay, like you said, it was a different level of communication that I had to learn.
Yeah, and sometimes those touch points can be helpful depending on your communication style with each other throughout the subsequent pregnancy. I know some people really like having their partner there for those big appointments, right? Like the first ultrasound or like the 20-week ultrasound or whatever your situation is as you're doing monitoring in the subsequent pregnancy. However, not everybody can be there. So sometimes, if a partner can't be there, I talk about bringing a friend or having them on call, or bringing them on the phone call if they can't be physically there. So coming up with a plan around those two can be a point of communication and tension, but also supportive.
I think I was just really selfish, rightfully so, I say, and just like being with my grief and being with my experience. I didn't really like so bad. Like I never really like checked in with my husband to see how he felt because I just felt like you had a different experience than I did. No shade, but I just was just like really internal on like my experience. I think that once she was here and we had that traumatic like delivery experience, I did get to see a little bit of his anxiety and just like supporting me. And like he did say like I wasn't sure, like I was worried that something was gonna happen to you because I wasn't sure what was gonna happen. So I did hear a little bit about his anxiety then, but I wasn't really concerned when I was pregnant. I was just like slowly focused on myself and like bringing this baby to the finish line. And I love him so much for sure, but I was not really. I was
That's
not really.
fair. And I think that's a common experience because we're so dysregulated and trying to get this baby here. And that's fine. I was like that too. He was worried about your health in general. And if, like I think that's a common theme we also see. It's not just that there are partners worried about the baby, they're also worried about us, and not just from a
Yeah,
mental health perspective, but also from a physical perspective. So
yeah,
those are two great points.
yeah.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Well, my husband and I both work from home, so he heard every little thing I had to say. So it was quite an experience where I'm just like, oh my gosh, I feel this. Oh my gosh, I don't feel this. What do I do? Do I do this? So bless him for being so patient with me. I was overly communicating every sort of little thing I did or did not feel. But I did feel a sense of sadness because when I had found out I was having a miscarriage, he was not at that appointment and I had texted him. I was so distraught after I had heard the doctor say that there was no heartbeat that I couldn't even call. I had to text it to him. And I feel bad about the way that I had delivered that news. So I kind of like overly communicated over the next pregnancy and tried to keep him more involved. I just initially I felt a lot of shame after having a miscarriage, and I know other women have said they've had similar experiences where they felt like the miscarriage was their fault. And that's how I was feeling. And that's why I didn't want to talk to him. Afterward, I know it's not my fault. It's not our faults that these things happen. But I carried a lot of shame and guilt after that. So then I tried to overcompensate and over communicate. But you know what? We made it out. We made it through. Our little girl's here. Um, we just kind of held our breath for 9 months, but she's here.
Yeah. And bringing up that shame piece is so important that that can be one of those uncomfortable feelings, the self-blame, thinking we did something wrong. That's why during our loss or what caused our loss, which is most likely not true, which is what the research shows statistically. But that doesn't mean that we don't believe that with the parental responsibility narrative that we just carry inherently as parents. There's a lot of research on that actually in the grief and loss community of those who have lost kiddos from miscarriage to living kiddos that were parenting at the time, or like teenagers and onward. So thank you for sharing that. Last question, real quick, because we have 5 minutes and that will probably take up the time. We want to end on wondering what are some of your recommendations for tangible ways that healthcare providers, friends, and family can support us through a PAL? We've touched on how healthcare providers can be reassuring and have conversations with them about, can you handle me? I went in with that all the time. Like, I'm going to be a lot. Can you take this on? I heard about MFM briefly. I think we could talk more about what that might be. I know that when I tell my clients, like, they're like, what helped you? I'm like, I went into every appointment, no matter who it was, because sometimes your healthcare provider is different or ultrasound tech is different. And I'm like, or called on the phone. I was like, I had a baby that died. She was stillborn at 40 weeks. This is what my problem is now. And I'm like, I ate lunch meat in my subsequent pregnancy. I'm worried something's going to happen, or it was probably like microwave lunch meat, like or lettuce from, that I'm afraid I had something like stuff that was just very anxiety provoking, but probably an intrusive, irrational thought. But I always led with this is where I'm standing. And I think telling people up front that you need that extra emotional support when you're going to seek physical services can also be helpful. So do you have any like tip and then having healthcare providers who are supportive of that. So do you have any tips for healthcare providers, therapists, friends, families, how they can support us through a subsequent pregnancy?
Just like Courtney said, just go in and say, this is what I need. Can you support me? And that's what I did. And I was able to get the support. Just short and sweet. Can you handle me as a patient? I've had X number of losses at X number of weeks and establishing that relationship early on.
I
I
was
would say
just, oh, go ahead, Nikia.
I would say just like having a positive, warm bedside manner, just like validating, maybe having a social worker or therapist on site can be really supportive, especially when you think about Black pregnant women and a lot of the health disparities. Sometimes we feel like we're not heard. There's a lot of women of color who die in childbirth, and there's so many anxieties and fears. So just like having those real tough conversations and really being genuine and empathetic when speaking to the person can be really supportive.
Thank you for bringing up that statistic and that reality. That's so unfortunate, and that we need to believe all women, and be even more mindful of our biases that we might bring as healthcare professionals, and not be invalidating and dismissive of people. So thank you for that. Courtney, do you want to say something too?
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you to Chelsea in the comments. I was reading that you're a chaplain at a hospital. And I think that's extra cool that you're leaning in to learn how to support families losing kiddos, because we had some chaplains that didn't know how to support and made it more hard on our side. So I think that's amazing that you're leaning in and learning how to support. Oh, and Stacy, thank you guys for being here. That's really neat. I think so. I did a parenting after loss group after Bennett was born through RTZ, and I asked some of the women to share, like, hey, I'm speaking on this panel. What would you like to share? And the summary is everyone is so different, and what was helpful for them. So I think you have to really connect to the mom or the family that you're supporting and ask them. Don't make assumptions. Like, we love to talk about our daughter Eleanor. That's really comforting for us. Some people don't. Like, there's such a vast variety of preferences in parenting after loss and pregnancy after loss, that I think you really need to lean into who you're talking to and what is going to be most helpful for them. I will say one thing that was super helpful for us, because the hospital was a very traumatic place for us. We had a door sign when Bennett was born. I know RTZ has them on the website. I made my own up in Canva with a picture of Ellie and just said, "Hey, we're really excited to be here for Bennett, but you have to know we have a daughter first." And the healthcare team that took care of us when we were with Bennett was very supportive, and was very inclusive of Eleanor in his birth, which was really, really special to us. So I'd say just lean into the family that you're supporting and ask them what they need.
I
I love that idea, Courtney. Like that was just like, oh, I love that.
absolutely thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. I think Aaron, we're turning it over to Aaron now. So I think it was a really wonderful roundtable.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I hate to jump in. We could let this stay open and go, I'm sure, another hour or two. Thank you all so much. I just wanted, on behalf of RTZ, it's for the providers here, like, please check your systems, like, throughout the whole continuum of care for patients, that make sure we're not sending automatic emails that congratulate you on milestones or remind you for appointments that may not be any longer needed, forms, not to be redundant on having to share the story over and over again when we have files now that should be there. So that's just my kind of 2 cents as a pregnancy after loss mom, and what we see systems wide is, please make sure you're not only supporting the individual, but that your systems are supporting those that you work with. If you are a provider at a system that you feel like needs help, RTZ does do training. We have toolkits. We have advisory hours and ability to go in and help you with all of that. But first and foremost, to those on the panel, thank you so much for sharing your hearts, for sharing your time, for sharing your stories, for letting us meet your children, both living and non-living, and sharing their stories and honoring them. Thank you so much to our sponsors who have allowed this to be free. A very special thank you to Ashley Kimberly and her family, who sponsored our gathering today in honor of their baby, Walker Kimberly. We just are honored to have this conversation on honor of them and all that you have been through. If you would like to continue to support the work that we're doing here at RTZ, please head on over to our website, either become a monthly supporter or a one-time donor. We would love to have you as part of the family. Our whole panel talked about our retreats and our support groups. Those are all on the website too. Please reach out if you need any support. We'd love to have you be a part of all of that. And with that, I'm going to close the event. I will send the recording out to anyone registered. Please feel free to share it far and wide. It'll be up on our website and YouTube soon as well. And thank you again to our amazing panel. Really appreciate all that you do.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being here.